What is your name and how old are you?
My name is Nancy Chappell, and I'm 50 years old.
In what way has addiction shaped your life?
Well, addiction has turned my life into a nightmare in which I lost a son, and my two other children lost their older brother. And the rest of it is a long, long, long story of a battle that lasted 6 years or so that would take me hours to recount.
Would you be able to go through some of the details or experiences of this story?
Sure. My son started experimenting with marijuana when he was 15, which is a little bit later than I think a lot of kids start. That progressed to things like ecstasy and Molly and eventually pills. This was all in high school. Eventually pills led to heroin, and heroin led to times of homelessness, led to meth. I watched my son turn from a healthy, strong, beautiful, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, tanned, muscular youth to a skinny, pale, drawn shadow of his former self. He was in jail. He was in rehab. He was in a therapeutic boarding school. None of these things seemed to help or to be effective in breaking the hold that heroin and opiates in particular had on him. He overdosed many times. Once was in our home. I had just gotten the other kids off to school, and I heard labored breathing coming from his room. So I went in and I saw him there struggling to breathe and blue, and tried to wake him up, and he didn't wake, so I called the paramedics, and by the time they got there I had woken him up a little bit, but he was not able to hear, so he didn't understand what I was saying to him. So I had to write things down. I wrote questions on paper. I said, "What did you take?" I wrote it down on paper, and he couldn't answer. They got him on the stretcher and they wheeled him to the ambulance, and on the way to the ambulance, he was able to look at me and shake his head and say, "I'm sorry, Mom, I'm sorry." So he spent 4 days in the hospital, and by the time he left the hospital, he had gone from that sorry young man to an angry, sort of, kind of a caged animal. He came home from the hospital and immediately turned around and went back out on the streets searching for more drugs. He overdosed another time, and at this point he was 18. So we were unable. I just knew something was wrong. That's all I knew, because I hadn't heard from him in a while. And so we went looking for him, and we went into the depths of the worst part of town and knocked on doors, and eventually found someone who told us that someone had died in the street of an overdose, and they thought it was my son. And so I didn't believe it, and so we decided to go to the local hospitals, and we went to the hospitals, but they couldn't tell us anything because he was 18, and so they wouldn't give us any information. And eventually some nurse took pity on me standing there in desperation and took me aside and said, "I can tell you that he was here. I can tell you that he left alive." So I did some more research, tracked him down. We had some friends who were doctors, and we said, what would happen if someone was admitted for an overdose? And what would happen when they leave, and they gave us some ideas. We eventually found him in a hospital 2 hours from where we lived, and we went and found him, and he was skin and bones. Couldn't walk because one leg didn't work, or one foot didn't work. Couldn't hold anything down, was just absolutely next door to death. We brought him home and we got him into treatment, and that lasted about 11 months, and his foot recovered, and you know, he was doing okay, not great, and then he relapsed, and eventually wound up back out on the streets. I mean, it just goes on and on. At one point, he was covered in sores. Just on and on. Eventually, I realized that he wasn't going to make it if things were the same, if things continued. And I thought to myself, what can I do? How can I get him away from this stuff that has such a hold on him? And the only thing I could think of was, we got to go to the wilderness. So I planned a trip. I said, okay, where can we go? And I eventually found the John Muir Trail in California, and I didn't know anything about hiking or backpacking, but I figured it out. I got ourselves a permit, and I eventually went and I put him in the car, and we were living in Missouri at the time. I drove to California and drove up to the John Muir Trail, and I strapped on 45-pound backpacks on each of us, and we started hiking, and we hiked for 93 miles, and he got strong and he got healthy, and there came a time when the first 3 days were miserable. I kept having to say, come on, Sam, you can do this, and he wanted to quit, but after the third day, the tables kind of turned, and he started pulling me along and saying, come on, Mom, you can do it. It was not easy. You can do it, Mom, you can do it. And he led me up Donahue Pass, which is 11,000 feet or so, and he got up there first and was so excited. Anyway, by the end of this trip, he was much stronger and healthy and clean, and he was excited about life. And we went back to Missouri, and he hooked up with a friend who was from Ohio, who he had met in the boarding school, and they were going to go to Ohio and get an apartment and get jobs, and off they went, and he got 2 jobs. He was so excited. He hadn't been able to work because of his addiction in a year and a half or so, so he got 2 jobs. He was very excited, had friends that he enjoyed. They had a good crowd. He was having a good time. But that drug had a hold on him, and he could not stay away. And we had a couple texts back and forth when I had that sinking feeling in my stomach, because I could tell just from a text that things had changed. And I asked him if he was okay, and he got defensive and said, why do you ask? And I said, I don't know, I just wondering about you. And my last text to him was the little emoji with the kiss. And I got a call one morning that his friend had found him dead of an overdose. And that's the end of that story.
Do you know what may have influenced your son to start using drugs?
He was a really beautiful soul. He really loved animals and nature and music. He was kind of dreamy, and he kind of lived in his head, and he had a little trouble fitting in. We were a military family, so we moved around a lot, so that sort of compounded those troubles. And I think by the time he got to maybe middle school, he had been bullied a little bit, and I think by the time he got to middle school, he sort of had given up on fitting in, and he sort of was looking for maybe his own or another way. And at that time, I think that the easiest place to fit in sometimes is with the people who are doing drugs, because they welcome someone who's willing to do that with them, and it feels good. So, and there you are, you get to fit in, you get to feel good. And I think that was the formula for him.
Could you tell us your own perception of drugs before your son started using them?
Yes. When I was a teenager, drugs were around, marijuana mainly and cocaine. I personally found life to be pretty interesting. I had enough going on, I think, that I didn't feel the need to do those things. And I also trusted what my parents and what my teachers were saying, and I believed them. And I thought to myself, well, I want to have a good life, so I'm going to stay away from that. Before Sam started using drugs, I knew that teenagers experiment with alcohol and marijuana, and I was aware that that could be a possibility. I had heard of OxyContin, but I didn't, it wasn't something that I thought would ever, the pills were not something that I thought would ever be a factor in our lives. And I was very wrong. I was very unaware of what was out there. Well, I guess that's it. I guess that's how I felt. I felt somewhat prepared. I was very unprepared for the tidal wave of drugs that exist in the school and that would influence our lives.
So how did your perception change after your experience?
Well, I think during the battle with Sam's addiction, I simply was involved in the battle. I was trying to educate myself as much as possible while fighting this battle. I think I've learned a lot more since his death that I wish I knew then. One thing I've learned is about the power of this addiction, the power of the addiction to opiates. I sort of thought that maybe after his hike, he would have the fresh start and the clean slate and, sort of the mentality where he could choose to go a different direction, and he could choose to not do these things anymore. I didn't realize what kind of hold those drugs have, and that really he could not do that without help. And the other thing that I've learned is that when I was young, I felt I could trust my parents and my teachers and society as a whole to keep me safe and to direct me in ways that were good for me. And I now believe that that is not necessarily the case, and that you can't really trust what society is telling you. And the evidence is the opioid epidemic. This is an epidemic that has been unleashed on us by pharmaceutical companies that have a profit motive and that intentionally misled us about these drugs and created this flood of drugs in society, by a medical profession that is overwhelmed or too busy to maybe too influenced by the pharmaceutical industry to look at these things critically and accepted what they were told. And so I think that it's appropriate now to have a much more healthy dose of skepticism. The other element of that is this push to legalize marijuana. I think it's incredibly irresponsible. Marijuana is not harmless. I have seen how marijuana changes thinking so that young people rationalize behavior that would never have been acceptable otherwise. It does not, in my experience, mellow someone out. It makes them unstable. And again, it changes thinking so that things that were previously unacceptable become unacceptable. And then that leads them down a terrible path. The marijuana that is out there is extremely powerful. And in the mind of an adolescent, it's extremely destructive. I think the way we've gone about legalizing marijuana is extremely irresponsible. If it is a medicine, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be distributed in a pharmacy.
And what has this experience taught you?
Well, again, it's taught me that skepticism is an important skill. And I think more than anything, I would like young people to know that the only person that really can take care of them is themselves. Everyone has got a different motive. There's the profit motive, and the pharmaceutical industry has a profit motive. The marijuana industry has a profit motive. These institutions are not out to take care of our youth. They're out to make money. Parents are good resources, teachers are good resources, but in the end it's up to the individual to find the good resources, to use the good resources, to ask questions, and to make decisions that are good for themselves.
And if you could tell any family members who may be going through the same thing that you experienced, or any kids who may be going through the same thing that your son did, what would you say?
I have maybe 3 pieces of advice for parents. One, you can't control this. If there's anyone that would have been able to control this, this would have been me. I did everything. I tried everything. And even beginning with marijuana, you cannot get someone to stop smoking marijuana if they want to smoke marijuana. That's on the milder end. If they're addicted to opiates, you cannot control it. You can't stop it. Only that individual can stop it. What you can do is love that person. You can let them know that you love them, and you can be there as a source of support. And I think that parents who are in the middle of the struggle experience a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of hopelessness, a lot of confusion. And it's very difficult to remember that this person is someone that you love and need to show that you love. And that's the most important thing, because when that person does decide to make a change, they're going to need someone to come back to. And if that person doesn't make it, you're going to want to look back and know that they knew that you loved them. And then the last thing is, parents, go to your medicine cabinets and get your medications and secure them. Your kids are taking them, and your kids' friends are taking them. So look at what you have, and if you don't need it, get rid of it. There are places that you can go. Here in Simi, you can take them to the police station and dispose of them, secure them.
Thank you very much for telling your story.
You're welcome.